welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and welcome to another video. Today we're going over my November reading wrap up and I might actually be on time with this video, so that's super exciting for me. I again had pretty big numbers in November and I'm really glad because again I got a lot of books off of my physical TBR, which I had been wanting to read that I've been kind of putting off, but I finally got to a lot of them and I'm super excited. We have a very long list of books to go through today. We actually have, let's go through my stats, 20 books. 20 books off my physical TBR. Let me see, did I buy anything new? No. And none of them were new purchases. All of them were books that I've had on my TBR for a couple of months since my last book haul. Maybe one of them was like a more recent purchase, but most of them I've been kind of catching up on my physical TBR. So I read 20 books in the month of November. 4 of them were novellas, however. I'm including novellas in that 20 number. I had 6 fantasies, 12 romance, 1 dark romance, and 1 dark academia. So we again have a lot of books to go through, as always. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first 2 books that I finished in November are the rest of the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, which is The Ballad of Never After and A Curse for True Love. These obviously are book 2 and book 3, and they are young adult fantasy. They continue the story of Evangeline and Jax. I kind of feel the same way about these as I did with Once Upon a Broken Heart. I didn't love Once Upon a Broken Heart because the writing felt really, really young for me, which is okay because a lot of audience really likes that. I know a lot of people really love that book and a lot of people really love this series. However, I find that it's a little young for me and I just couldn't get into it. So this is not my favorite series, but I'm glad that I read it. I am disappointed, however, because it's not what I expected. I definitely expected to like the series a lot more than I did. So I am a little bit disappointed, but you know, not every book is for everybody and some people like other things, and maybe it was just my mood, but I don't know. I don't really think it was my mood for these. I think for these it was more like the writing that just, it wasn't my favorite type of writing. So for the second book, The Ballad of Never After, this one, unfortunately, I gave it 2 stars because there really wasn't much about this book that I liked, very little in fact. And this one, A Curse for True Love, I think I rated this 2.5 stars and rounded up to 3 stars on Goodreads. This one picked up a little bit. I think there was a little bit more romance in this one. It felt a little bit more adulty, young adulty than juvenile, but very slightly, in my opinion. So I rated this one 2.5, rounded up to 3 stars. It was just a little bit better than this one and a little bit better than the first one. So these are the first 2. If you're one of those people that really loved the series and this is one of your favorite series, that's amazing. I love that for you because they are good books. I just didn't think they were for me. It's too bad. I'm disappointed, but it is what it is. So we're gonna move on. Okay, the next book I read was A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, and this is an adult fantasy that is kind of based on Norse mythology, or like on the Vikings, and I really loved this book. This was one of my top reads of the year. So in this book, some people have magical powers because they were given like a drop of blood from one of the gods, and they're kind of like a descendant from the gods, and she is one of them. But her father, growing up, has always told her to keep this a secret. Because of the kind of magic that she has, it's very easy for her to become weaponized. There's multiple kings throughout the lands, but the prophecy stated that she would unite all the lands under one king. So that one king would be like the reigning king over everybody. So there wouldn't be like multiple kings anymore. Whoever has like control of her magic will become the next king, essentially. So it is to her benefit to keep that a secret. So she's grown up now. She's been keeping it a secret for a very long time. She's married to this guy that she hates. He's not a really great guy. He decides that he wants to divorce her and for the king to come and get her so he could get a divorce from her. Well, so that's what happens. So the king comes to pick her up and he needs to test her. He thinks she's got magic, but he's not sure because, you know, she's been keeping that a secret, but she didn't really know that her husband actually knew about it and that he blabbed to the king that she has magical powers. Okay, so the king comes out, he makes her fight Bjorn, and Bjorn is his son, and he's also kind of like got a droplet of blood from one of the gods, so he's also a powerful fire wielding kind of like dude. Okay, so that's the basic premise of this story. This was really good. If you've ever seen the show Vikings on History Channel. It was kind of like an old show. It reminded me a lot of this. It's very similar to that, where like the women are also badasses and Freya is a badass. This is very high stakes. There's a lot happening. The writing is really, really good. I also listened while I read, and I highly recommend you do this because some of the names are very confusing. So if you're just reading without listening, it's going to slow you down. And I think that has made me really, really love this book, because once you get like really immersed in this story, like you just really get lost, and it's so, so good. I was really nervous going into it because I did see mixed reviews about this, but I'm glad I went into it, and I'm glad that I picked up the audio along with reading, because it really has become one of my top reads of the year. Like I really, really love this book. I also voted for it in the Goodreads Choice Awards. It didn't win, but I did vote for it, so. This is the first book of the Saga of the Unfated, and the second book to this comes out next year, so I'm really looking forward to that. I have no predictions as to what that one's going to be about or who it's going to follow. Maybe her brother, or if it's going to continue her story, or what it's going to be. I have absolutely no idea, but I am really looking forward to reading that one. I cannot wait. And I just absolutely love this. So highly recommend if you have not read this. If you're at all worried about reading this because of the mixed reviews, give it a chance and listen to it on audio and read along with the book, because that will make all the difference for this one. I guarantee it. I know that like if you just listen to it, it won't have the same impact. You're gonna kind of like get lost because there's a lot going on, and you like have to pay attention a little bit in this one. And if you're just reading it, you might lose interest because the words and the names are really long and complicated, and they were just very unfamiliar to me. So I feel like a lot of people will have the same problem, and they're going to lose interest. So the audio keeps it going quickly, and reading along with the audio is going to make sure that you don't get lost, okay? So highly recommend doing that. Obviously you don't have to, but highly recommend doing it. This story was great. I really, really loved it, and that was 5 stars, guys. This was a 5-star read for me. Okay, the next book I read in November was Twice Shy by Sarah Hogel, and this follows Maybelle and Wesley. This book starts off with a lot of drama in the first couple of chapters. So Maybelle is working at this hotel as an event coordinator, or this like resort and spa kind of thing, as an event coordinator, and she has this friend who's actually a frenemy, Gemma, who is the daughter of the owner of the hotel or whatever. Gemma does some really, really messed up things to her. So needless to say, there is so much drama between them. It is insane. Like the things you will read on paper when you read this book, if you read this book, it is insane. I was like reading like this, like I could not wrap my brain around the things that Gemma did. Like it was crazy. Okay, so Maybelle's not very happy with her life. She is not happy with her job. She's not happy with her friend Gemma, or frenemy Gemma. She's not happy with where she lives. It's just like nothing's going very well for her. Her great aunt Violet dies, and then Maybelle inherits everything, her entire estate, which means it's the house, the land, everything that comes with it, okay? So immediately Maybelle quits her job, packs up her car, and goes to live in that house. So she goes there. She discovers the executor of the will in like the guest house on the property, and there's a guy there with her. And it turns out that that guy Wesley is the guy who was in the cabin. He also inherited the house. So they both inherited this house, and they have to share it or sell it or whatever they need to do with it, because they are both the inheritors of the house. He actually takes care of the property. He's like the maintenance guy or something like that. So her aunt had a relationship with him, but she left the entire estate to the both of them. Okay, so now they have to figure that out. Communication with them is a little hard at first because they are both very, very shy. She is shy, and he has like, I think he has social anxiety or something. So at first they're butting heads, but like the communication is not very good, but it's for those reasons, but it is done really, really well. And then slowly over time, as they're like working on fixing up the property together, they start breaking down these walls that they have around each other, and you know, things get really, really good. I thought the writing was incredible. I thought the romance was really, really sweet. I thought these characters had really good depth to them. They were very well developed, and the romance was very well developed. It was definitely like a good like lead in. It is definitely not insta love, definitely not insta lust or insta love or anything like that. their romance is very well fleshed out. There is no third act breakup in this one, so if you don't like third act breakups, this is one to read. And once we get into like the meat of everything, like it just gets so sweet and wholesome, and it's just such a nice romance. It's like rainbows and sunshine, you know what I mean? Like it's like one of those books that will just like warm your heart, and you will just love these characters. So it's pretty good for the fall season. I wouldn't say it's like a winter book or anything like that, but it is pretty good for the fall season, or you could really read it any time of the year. But I think there were some activities that they did that were set in the fall, so that's why I picked this one up for November, and I'm really glad I did. I really enjoyed it, and I rated it 4 stars. All right, the next book I read was Loath to Love You by Ali Hazelwood, and this is actually 3 novellas, 3 of her STEMinist novellas that are Under One Roof, Stuck With You, and Below Zero. And these all follow a group of 3 girls who are friends, or best friends. The first one is Under One Roof, and that follows Mara and Liam. Mara is a PhD student or engineering student or something like that, and her advisor dies and leaves her house, kind of similar to Twice Shy actually. The same thing happens. Her and her advisor had this like really good relationship. They were like family. So her advisor dies and she leaves her house. I think it was in DC if I remember correctly, but I can't remember really at this moment. Anyways, so Mara graduates from school. She doesn't really have any money. She's looking for a new job, so she decides to go and live in the house while Liam is living there. And Liam is, I think he was her nephew. Yes, she left the other half of the house to Liam, who is her nephew, and he is a lawyer. So naturally, they're not very happy because they have to share the house. He's already living in it. He doesn't want her living in it. For a novella, Ali Hazelwood did an amazing job with the writing because it almost felt a little bit like a slow burn. Like it was definitely not like, I mean, maybe there was like a little bit of like moments of like insta love, insta lust or something like that, but like them noticing each other. But it felt almost like a slow burn. She did an amazing job like that. And it's a short novella. So like, I don't know how many pages the first one is. Let's see. Yeah, so it's like 122 pages for the first one. And it was such good writing because it did not feel like a novella. Like this could have been a book. But then it like wraps up really nice and clean. It was just like so well done. I thought it definitely did not feel like insta-lovey, insta-lusty as like a lot of novellas kind of have to be because they just don't have the space to like create like well fleshed out story. But I thought Ali Hazelwood did an amazing job with this first novella. I really loved it, and I rated it 5 stars because it was just so good. She doesn't write anything that's not 5 stars. As I said in all my previous videos, Ali Hazelwood does not write anything that's not 5 stars. Like in my head, she doesn't. Everything is 5 stars. Everything she touches is 5 stars. Okay, yeah, this had really great writing, really great dialogue, really great like quips and humor and all of it. It was all just so well put together. I absolutely loved it. The second novella in here is Stuck With You, and that one follows Sadie and Eric. And Sadie and Eric get stuck in an elevator in a building somewhere where, I don't know where their offices are. I don't really remember all the details of that, but they're stuck in an elevator together. They have a history though because they broke up in the past for certain reasons, and now they're stuck, and now they have to like be in close quarters together. This one wasn't quite as good as the first one, but it was still really good. It was still so bingeable. The writing is incredible. The humor is really good. This one was a little bit more serious, I thought, but still amazing writing, amazing story. Really quick read, obviously, is another 100 and something pages, so it's not very long at all. It definitely didn't feel like an insta-lovey, insta-lusty story either. It was a second chance, obviously, because they knew each other in the past. And I rated Stuck With You 4.75 stars and rounded up to 5 stars on Goodreads. And then the last one is Below Zero, and this one follows Hannah and Ian. And Hannah is obviously friends with the other 2 girls from the other 2 novellas, and Ian is Mara's cousin from the first book. They both work for NASA. They're working on a project, and there's like a miscommunication related to the funding of the project, so they become rivals. All 3 of these are kind of like rivals to lovers kind of situations, but same thoughts on this one. I really loved the writing. I loved the story. Ali Hazelwood wrote emotion in these so well. None of them felt like insta-lovey, insta-lusty. They kind of could have been like, if it was a long book, it would have been a slow burn. So I just really love them. I love the writing. I love the banter. I love the quips. I loved the humor in these, and I loved the emotion behind these stories. So for Below Zero, I gave it a 4.5-star rating, but rounded up to 5 stars on Goodreads. So that was that one. I loved all of these. Highly recommend if you're looking for quick reads. They're all interconnected stories. They're all the same group of friends. They all kind of have similar concepts, but they are super, super fun. Highly recommend these novellas by Ali Hazelwood. As I always recommend Ali Hazelwood books, she's just one of the best authors and I absolutely love her. So these are the Loathe to Love You novellas. The next book I read was The Dark Academia, and that is If We Were Villains by ML Rio. And this follows this group of friends who are at this like Shakespearean college. They're students of Shakespeare in this college, and they're located in like Broadwater, Illinois, I think it was. But I looked it up and that town does not exist. It is actually a fictional town. Well, anyways, this starts off in the future with the main character, Oliver, as he's being kind of like released from prison because something happens and he ends up going to prison for it. And throughout the entire book, we're just kind of like trying to figure out what happened, who did it, and it's kind of like a mystery in that sense, okay? This one, I was kind of bored throughout this book. Honestly, I couldn't get into it. I couldn't really care about the characters. There's a lot of scenes of them being in school and practicing Shakespeare. There's a lot of like Shakespeare quotes in this. It's just very like focused on the school. So I really couldn't get into like the characters or get myself to like really care about them that much. I don't know if it was my mood or if I just wasn't ready to read this book, but I honestly found myself to be a little bit bored while I was reading this. So maybe Dark Academia is just not my genre. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe if I read it at a different time with a different mindset, I would enjoy it more. But this one, I didn't enjoy that much. Although I will say that it was actually very atmospheric for the season because the school itself, it's like in that school setting where I kind of imagined when I was reading, I kind of imagined it looking kind of like Northwestern University in Chicago, where it has like the Gothic kind of like stone architecture, similar to Hogwarts, but not quite as old as Hogwarts and not quite as magical and mystical as Hogwarts, but still like that Gothic architecture, stone architecture, and that's kind of how I imagined this setting to be, which I really, really loved. But I just couldn't get into the story and I couldn't get into the characters. Unfortunately, this one was not my favorite and I ended up rating this one 3 stars. The next book I read was Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto, and this is the book that follows Forget Me Not, which I read in September, October, and I really, really loved it. That was a 5-star read, and so was this. So this book follows Gwen, who is a professional violinist, and Xander, who is a professional celloist. It starts off with Gwen and her friend going to a wedding to play. They were actually hired by Emma from the first book, and when she gets there, she learns that they thought they actually hired a professional celloist instead of a professional violinist to play at this wedding. And she's kind of like in a hard place, but she does know how to transpose music and it's a string instrument. So she sits down and she plays the cello. It's not as great as like she hoped it would be because like I guess transposing music in your head from like violin to cello is difficult. I don't really know. I'm not like a music person, but apparently it's difficult. But she does okay. No one really notices anything except for Xander, who was actually there because he brought in the cello so that someone could play it because it was like one of his relatives or friends or somebody who was getting married and he was in the wedding, so he couldn't actually play. It turns out that they actually work for the same music company. He just didn't recognize her before, but after this, he starts to see her and things get intense. This was incredibly sexy, very steamy, but also very, very emotional. Like Julie Soto is such a good writer. She knows how to write emotion really, really well. Like it just like jumps off the page. Like you could just feel it. I absolutely loved this book. I had such a great time reading this. Like I literally couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting and I pulled an all-nighter reading this book. It was that good. Highly recommend if you haven't read anything by Julie Soto. Obviously this is a 5-star. Ali Hazelwood blurbed it, so of course I picked it up. And I'm really happy I did because this is another one of my top reads of the year. I really liked both of the characters. I loved Gwen from the very beginning. With Xander, I was a little bit iffy about him from the beginning, but then like he really like makes you care about him throughout the story, and I really, really love that. Like it's I do like those stories where you love both characters from the very beginning, but then sometimes like it's always nice to read about a character where you like kind of dislike them a little bit, but then you kind of grow to like them throughout the book. It makes it more interesting, it makes it more fun, and I do enjoy that as well. And I think Xander was one of those characters where you aren't really sure whether or not you like him in the beginning, but then, you know, you really grow to like him throughout the book. So I really love them both. I love the story. I love the emotion. I love the writing. Everything about this book was perfect, and it was 5 stars. So that's Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. The next book I read in November was Jane and Edward by Melody Edwards, and this follows Jane and Edward. This is supposed to be a modern reimagining of Jane Eyre, and honestly, I've never read Jane Eyre, so I don't know if this is like inspired by that or if it's a reimagining or anything like that, so I can't speak to that. All I could say is this book was interesting. It was definitely enjoyable. It follows the main character Jane, who was orphaned, and she grew up in kind of like foster care and like difficult conditions, so she's like used to making hard decisions and not having a lot of luxuries. Well, she puts herself through school to become a legal assistant, and then she gets hired to work for Edward. Now, Edward is a lawyer, and he's actually the son of the guy who owns the company, but he is kind of like loud and unrefined and, you know, like very mean to his legal assistants. A lot of them quit. Many of them don't last more than like a week or something. But Jane has never had the security of a steady paycheck, so she is determined to make this work. And over time, like as she's not quitting, as she's like putting up with his bullshit, he starts to kind of like see her as like somebody who can hold her own. He grows to respect her. He sees that she is really, really smart and she can hold her own and she can defend herself and she's not a pushover and all those things. It was definitely interesting and different than anything I've ever read before. I've never read a book where a male main character was kind of like Edward, and this book was. I really, really loved Jane. I loved how she was like a strong female main character. I really absolutely loved her. So the romance in this one happened kind of quickly for my liking. They were friends, but then suddenly they're like in love with each other, and there wasn't a lot of in between. Not really like that lead up that I like to read about. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. There is no on-page spice. This is a fade to black story, which is okay. I completely respect that, and that's perfectly fine. There was a moment where I was able to predict the twist, which was like for the third act breakup. There is a third act breakup in this, and I was able to predict that twist, but the last third of the book kind of like took a turn that I wasn't expecting, and then I was like, what is going on here? And I was wondering when they are going to go back on track, which they ended up going back on track, but there was like a little bit of an unexpected turn in the last third of the book, which, you know, was actually kind of fun to read about, I would say. But overall, I still really enjoyed this book. It was unlike any other book I read, and the characters were unlike any other characters I've read, especially Edward. So that was interesting, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. So that's Jane and Edward by Melody Edwards. The next book I read was The Nanny by Lana Ferguson, and this was a really, really fun read. So this essentially follows Cassie and Aiden. Cassie is putting herself through school, wanting to become an occupational therapist, and for a while, in order to put herself through school, she did OnlyFans. Okay, but she finished school and she graduated, and she obviously quit her account. Now she is working as an occupational therapist at a children's hospital, but she unfortunately gets laid off. So Aiden, who is a chef, he needs a nanny, and he hires her to be like the live-in nanny because he's a chef and he works nights. He usually works the dinner shift, and he needs somebody to take care of his 9-year-old daughter because he's a single dad. So he hires Cassie, and she's the live-in nanny. Cassie is really, really funny. She has like this best friend who's like this 70-year-old woman or 75-year-old woman, and Wanda, her name is, and she's really, really funny too. There's really good quips in here. It is pretty humorous. I really love that. It is very insta-lusty and very spicy from the very beginning, which obviously, like, you kind of know that going in because it is a Lana Ferguson book, so you know this is going to be spicy, and it was. It did deliver on that front, but I still really enjoyed it. I really had a great time reading this. The dad and his daughter are really cute. They have a really sweet relationship. The only thing I really didn't enjoy about this book was the third act breakup, because it was like one of the most ridiculous third act breakups that I've read in any book, really. It wasn't like sad or anything. It was more of like borderline ridiculous, and it almost made me mad. So I didn't love that part of it, but it was really good overall and a really fun read, and I enjoyed the rest of the book besides that third act breakup. So I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars because it was another one of those quick, fun, fast, enjoyable, spicy reads that just, that are just overall really, really fun. So that's The Nanny by Lana Ferguson. The next book I read was Final Offer by Lauren Asher, and this is the third book in the Dreamland Billionaire series, and now I have completed the Dreamland Billionaire series, so I'm very happy about that. This one's following the third brother, Cal, and if you know, in this series, there's this grandfather and there's three brothers, and he has a different wish for them to complete, or he has different requirements for them to complete in order for them to collect their inheritance, and they all have to complete them. They cannot cheat. They just have to just do essentially what was in the will in order to get their 18% of the company or something like that, right? So with Cal, he had this house and he needed Cal to live in that house for 2 years before selling it. But herein lies the problem. He gave that house to Alana. Well, Alana is living there with her daughter. This is actually a second chance romance because they did previously have a relationship and then they broke up. And that's the main premise of this book. Now, Cal struggles with addiction and alcoholism, and he's been to rehab a couple of times. It hasn't been working, so there's like a lot of issues with that. I'm not really sure how accurate the representation is in this book, so I'm not going to speak to that, but that is in this book, if you were wondering. I did enjoy this book. I thought the writing was really good. Some of their arguments were a little bit kind of like immature, but whatever. I thought he was really good with the daughter. It was actually really funny what he let her get away with. I thought that was hilarious. So there was a little bit of humor in this, but the writing was good. I enjoyed reading it. I was definitely interested in the story. It kept my attention, and I got through it, I think maybe in like one day or one sitting or something like that. So I ended up rating this one 3.75 stars and rounded up to 4 stars on Goodreads, and that is the final book of the Dreamland Billionaire series, which is Final Offer by Lauren Asher. The next book I read was Life and Death by Stephenie Meyer, and this is the Twilight Reimagined book. So I read Twilight a long time ago. It was one of my favorite series, and I think it still is one of my favorite series. But I guess over the years, Stephenie Meyer had gotten a lot of criticism about like Bella being weak, kind of like a weak female character, being a damsel in distress that needs to be saved, being like overly consumed with her relationship and the boyfriend and Edward and all that kind of thing, all those kinds of criticisms. So she writes this note in the beginning where she kind of explains that she wanted to basically show that this story works both ways, that if the main character was male and the vampire was female, that the story would still work. So she essentially took the same story as Twilight and switched the two characters, switched them gender-wise, and only made the adjustments that like required like the gender switch or something. So it was essentially still like kind of like the same story, but now the story follows Beau instead of Bella, and Edith instead of Edward. And Edith is the vampire from the family, and basically every character's genders are swapped. I was disappointed in this one. I did not think that this was necessary because in Twilight, Bella's a human and she's surrounded by all these supernaturals, and she was in no position to be a hero. Like, let's be real here. Like, the story was what it was, and I was happy with that story, and I almost kind of regret reading this because, I don't know, it just changed the story into something that it never should have been. It wasn't my favorite. I didn't love it. I couldn't get into the characters. It kind of ruined the story for me. I do regret reading this a little bit. Like, I still liked it because I still have nostalgia towards the story, but I didn't think this was necessary, and I didn't think that it did any justice to the original story. So if you are a fan of Twilight and you like the original story, I actually would not recommend that you read this because, if you want to keep the original story's integrity in your mind, don't read this. I ended up rating this one 3 stars because it was all right, but I really couldn't get into it. I thought the original story was so much better. So that's Life and Death by Stephenie Meyer, and that was 3 stars. Okay, the next book I read was actually a reread of Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and this is a cozy fantasy that I read in December in 2023, and I read it again because there was like actually a book club here that was reading it, and I wanted to go, but I didn't really remember what happened in it, so I wanted to do a reread just to kind of like refresh my mind. I didn't end up going to the book club, but I did reread the book, and I actually enjoyed it better the second time around. So I think last year I rated this either a 3 or 3.5 or something like that, and I ended up changing my rating to 4 stars because of the atmospheric vibes that this book gives you. This essentially follows Viv, who is an orc. So she moves to this town and she wants to open the first ever coffee shop. No one really knows what coffee is, so she's seen it somewhere and she wants to open this coffee shop. She no longer wants to like battle and be in war, and she just kind of wants to settle down and open this business. She hires Tandri, who is a succubus, and she is like the barista that works in the coffee shop. And she also hires Ratkin, who's like a little rat, and he is basically like a chef or a baker, and everybody's basically obsessed with his pastries because they're so delicious. So I really loved the atmosphere of this book. It is so cozy, just as it's described to be cozy fantasy. That's exactly what this is. It's so cozy. It's so like warm and inviting, and like talks about the food and describes the coffees and the smells and like the friendship. This book is basically a warm hug in a book. It's supposed to be very low stakes, so there isn't supposed to be anything bad happening, but there is something that happens in here that I would consider actually more of like a higher stake. Not high stakes, but like a higher stakes, which makes it a lot more interesting, but maybe takes away just a little bit from like the cozy factor. But either way, I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. It definitely gets you in like that fall, like warm, it gives you those feelings, you know. It makes you feel cozy and warm, and it makes you want to have a hot beverage when you read this book. So that was my reread of Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and I ended up changing my rating to 4 stars for this one. I also ended up reading the novella, which is technically a prequel to Legends and Lattes, which is called Pages to Fill, and that was basically the story of Viv discovering like the coffee shop for the first time. The story is of her crew, and they were in pursuit of a different orc. As they're kind of like pursuing him, they stumble upon a bookshop, a library, a coffee shop, and that's kind of how she discovers coffee. I did enjoy that one as well. It was still also kind of atmospheric, but a lot more high stakes because of like the pursuit aspect of it. And I did wish that it had more of like that, like the feelings associated with her when she first discovers the coffee shop. It touched on it, but it didn't really make that like the main aspect of the novella, which I was a little bit disappointed about, but I still enjoyed it, and it was a good novella nonetheless. So I ended up rating that one 4 stars as well. The next book I read was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams, and Sarah Adams, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, has become one of my favorite authors because her writing is so incredible. She's so good at writing quips and banter and like just dialogue. It is just hilarious the way that she writes that. So I really love that in her books. And this book follows Nathan and Bree. Nathan is a pro football player and Bree is a ballerina, and she gets injured or something, and so she can't go pro, so she ends up becoming a ballet teacher. Now, they've been best friends for a really long time, but they've been like harboring these secret feelings for each other, and like they've had these crushes on each other for a really long time, and they've never been single at the same time until now. So essentially what happens is Bree accidentally gets drunk, spills something about her crush to a reporter, and it gets all over social media, and now everybody on social media wants them to date. So his publicist decides, hey, maybe it's a good idea for you guys to date or fake date or something like that. So this is a fake dating situation. So they decide to do the fake dating thing, but obviously they have real feelings for each other, and their feelings for each other are very serious, and Nathan kind of wants to like get out of the friend zone, and so him and his like football buddies come up with this romance cheat sheet to kind of help him get out of the friend zone. Now, I highly recommend this book for like the funny and the humor and the banter. It is so, so good. I also really loved the friend group here. All the guys and Bree, they're all like so close-knit. It is so sweet to read about. I absolutely loved it. It's a very short book, so you can get through it really quickly. I think I read it all in one sitting. I pulled another late nighter with this one because I just couldn't put it down. It is so good. It is so funny. It is so sweet. It is romantic. And I absolutely loved every minute of this book. I rated this one 4.5 stars. So that is The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. The next book I read was Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. It's basically a high school drama about this girl, Liz, who is like a hopeless romantic, and she loses her mom, and her mom used to have this tradition of like watching rom-coms, so she's like really loving rom-com, and she believes in happy endings and true love and like meet cutes and all those things, okay? So she's just like a true hopeless romantic. She has this neighbor, Wes, who kind of picked on her throughout high school, and this other guy, Michael, is also in this book, who she used to have a crush on, and he actually comes back into town. He leaves for a while and then comes back into town, and she has a crush on him. And she enlists Wes to help her kind of like get her to this party where she can talk to him essentially, and like maybe like start up a conversation so that he might be interested in her, because Wes and Michael are friends. There were a few things about this that kind of bothered me a little bit. Like at first, like she comes off a little bit bratty, like to her friends especially, as like this like bratty teen, but she does end up redeeming herself like towards the end and does turn it around, so that was all right. And then there's also a third act breakup that's based on miscommunication, and that wasn't my favorite thing about it. But overall, I did really enjoy this book. It was another one of those books that I read in one sitting and stayed up late to read it because I just couldn't put it down. It was very, very interesting, despite those little things that, you know, aren't my favorite in books in general. I really liked the development of their relationship, and like how it comes about was really interesting and fun to read about. Definitely a fun read. It has a lot of references to like rom-coms and old movies and things like that, which was very enjoyable and nostalgic. But I had a great time reading this one. I ended up rating it 4 stars, so that's Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. Are We Stable? Okay. All right. We're making 2 piles now. Okay, the next book I read was Lights Out by Navisa Allen, and this is a dark romance, kind of like a dark stalker romance, but it's supposed to be kind of like a rom-com similar to Butcher and Blackbird, if you've read that, where there's like humor infused in it. But essentially it follows the main character, Allie, who's a trauma nurse, and Josh. Allie has like a very specific kink, and she watches this guy, Josh, who wears a mask on TikTok, and he performs this specific kink. And Josh is also a serial stalker, but his dad was a serial killer, and Josh kind of is afraid of turning into him. So he's kind of like cautious with himself. He has a little bit of a hard time with like self-control, I guess. So for this book, I also listened to the audio and read along at the same time because I was told the audio was really, really good. And I'm glad I did that because there's a lot of intonations in the audiobook that kind of like make this book. And I think primarily Josh as a character makes this book. He was funny, and he was crazy and unhinged and kind of like extreme in everything that he did. And I really, really liked his character. Whereas Allie was just okay, and I really didn't care for her. She does have a cat named Fred, and I really liked her cat, and I liked Josh with the cat. I thought that was really, really sweet and cute. Obviously, this is a dark romance, so read trigger warnings, but it is pure spice. It is pure spice from like chapter 1. There is a lot of it in this book, so if you don't like that, this one's probably not for you. But overall, I had a really fun time reading this. It was definitely interesting, a little bit unhinged, and I really, really liked Josh's character in this one, so I ended up rating this one 4 stars, and that's Lights Out by Navisa Allen. Or is it Navessa Allen? I'm not really sure how to say this author's name. I think she might be Navessa Allen, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's this one. The next book I read was also by Sarah Adams, and that is The Rule Book. This essentially follows Nora and Derek. Nora works for Nicole, who is the agent of the football players in the first book, The Cheat Sheet, and Derek is one of those football players. And Nora and Derek are kind of exes from college, and she gets assigned to be Derek's agent. Now, Derek is still harboring some resentful feelings towards Nora about the breakup that they had in college, and he is determined to make her life difficult as his agent because he's, you know, he's still kind of angry. So in order for them to make this arrangement work, they come up with this set of rules of like boundaries they cannot cross, and they call it like the rule book. This is another really, really good Sarah Adams book because it has really great banter, really sweet romance, really great characters. I really love the found family in this. I love the friend group, and I ended up rating this one 4.25 stars. So that is the rule book by Sarah Adams. And the final book I read for November was So This Is Christmas by Tracy Ann Dreen. This book was interesting in the sense that it had the kind of like a very, very similar setup to Gilmore Girls. And I know this because I'm currently rewatching all the seasons of Gilmore Girls, and I am just seeing so many similarities in this book to like the setup of Gilmore Girls. Like for one, the main character here, Finley, is like very socially awkward and very, very smart, and she goes away to this boarding school which she was originally waitlisted for, kind of like Rory Gilmore was waitlisted for Chilton. Her mother got pregnant with her in high school, so she's also from like a very young parent. She ends up working in an inn in her small town called Christmas, Oklahoma, and she ends up dating this guy who's also got like floppy hair and like is too good looking for her, which is very reminiscent of Dean. Her grandparents are in the picture, like her grandfather or father or somebody is like an insurance salesman, just like Rory's grandfather. So there are a lot of similarities between like the setup of this book and like the setup of Gilmore Girls. But essentially the similarities end there. And what happens in this book is she wants to quit boarding school. Oh, also the boarding school is in Connecticut, FYI. But she wants to quit boarding school and she wants to move back to Christmas, Oklahoma. So when she goes home for winter break, this guy that is a schoolmate of hers ends up coming there as well because she built this website about the town, and he wants to show his aunt like a real American Christmas because they're from the UK. The story does get atmospheric in the sense that like they end up doing a lot of Christmassy things together, like reindeer sleigh rides and Christmas cookies and things like that. But I did find myself being kind of bored because I just wasn't into their romance, and it just didn't grab my attention as much as I hoped it would, and I just really didn't care about the characters that much. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars, and that is So This Is Christmas by Tracy Ann Dreen. I evened out my piles now, and we can close out this video here. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I again found myself having better luck with the romances this month than the fantasies and the dark academia, but I still really enjoyed it. I pulled a lot of all-nighters to finish some of these books in one sitting, which is great. I love when that happens. I mean, I'm tired the next day, but I love when that happens because that is a real good like telltale sign of a good book, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So I had a great time. I found a lot of favorite new books and a couple top reads of the year. So I'm super happy. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.